Good morning. I want to do an update here from Virginia, not only for Virginians who are wondering what's going on with bills in the General Assembly related to sexual crimes, but also elsewhere in the country, just so that you're aware of what's going on here in Virginia. So there's been some key changes here at crossover. This is the halfway point where the Senate scoops up all their bills, some 400 and some here for this short session compared to like over 1,000 last year, and they go over the House with them, and the House takes theirs over to the Senate, and then they debate them, and they, of course, they must pass out of committee in both bodies and out of each body and be voted on before they're enrolled, and then they go on to the governor from there. Um, the governor has some powers too to do some vetoing, and of course to even uh, reinvigorate and uh, birth some legislation that kind of gets clobbered. I don't pretend to understand every aspect of it. You know, I spend most of my time working multiple jobs and stuff. So, but I am doing my best here to make sure that people are aware of it. So here goes. So what has passed? Most things have failed, thank God, because all they do is punish people further and further and further as they punish no other particular crimes. You have to understand too, if you've been convicted of some sexual offense, there is a perpetual punishment philosophy both on the Republican side as well as the Democratic side. They will tell you that's not true, but it is. There's nothing that has a greater stigma than when you suggest too that it involves a child, even though it may not involve a child. Even though there are many of us who had no intention, no interest in hurting children, it doesn't matter. Once you get that stigma on you, that's it. So, starting with the passes. So, HB 1846 and Senate Bill 1157, the companion bill, are now going in their respective positions in the House and Senate. And what this would do is, it sounds like it's a pretty good bill. What it would do is notify victims if their perpetrator has changed his or her name. So if you want to avoid the stigma, for example, you want to change your name because you have a real victim and you want to keep out of that victim's uh, radar screen, you can change your name. And right now, there's no law that prevents it. And it sounds like a pretty good one. And it would be, I suppose, if you had an actual victim. But what if you don't have a victim? What if there's actually no victim? It doesn't matter. It would still prevent you from having the ability to get on with your life in a very different way. Um, Maybe you are somebody who's getting married, though, and your last name changes. That too, presumably, would notify your victim. And so you'd be open to harassment too. For those of you who say, well, you know, for real victims, you're not being fair and you're not being honest, and we need to protect our victims, totally get that. I really do. But what about the people who, A, aren't people? They're fictitious children. They're fictitious people because you've been caught in some kind of sting where there's no sex talk or anything like that, or you've been exposed yourself in the forest or something, and some kid went by and you were taking a whiz there. I mean, there are all kinds of scenarios that we're constantly told are not important, that don't happen, but actually do happen. Okay, what about those people? What about you want to get married and get on with your life? Well, don't think that these good and moral people aren't trolling you somewhere in social media. You know, like I said many times to people over the years, 25 years ago when they first came out with the internet, and we read article after article about how wonderful it would be. It would connect everybody together around the world. And some of us, notably me, said, yeah, but it's also going to bring all the ugly things about people, you know, the tyranny of the majority, okay, the ostracism, you know, the mean girl syndrome, right? All that's going to come out too. Oh, no, that would never come out. That's exactly what's happened, okay? I mean, I heard it repeatedly. I wrote to letters to the editor, and I was told I didn't know what I was talking about. Fine, look what's happened. Okay, trolls love this kind of stuff. So I'm thinking that's more of a mixed blessing. Um, Passed also of the House and the Senate. Uh, was actually that's the major one. So what has failed is the bill 2279 and Senate Bill 1026. This is really interesting. This would allow the Attorney General to take command of any sex charges around the Commonwealth. So the current Attorney General, who loves to hammer people and who has on his staff the woman who prosecuted me by lying, lying about what was actually done and conflating completely separate and unrelated elements together, and also uh, um, pushing up the lie that Detective Robert Bauer said. And when I confronted her on this, you should have seen how angry she was when I exposed for the court what had happened. But the court was in on it too because, as I pointed out, judges get good guy points for hammering people who have sex offenses. So they are very, very reluctant not to hammer you. That one fortunately failed. So the attorney general is not going to get his way for a while. And so what he's doing is screaming and yelling to the Commonwealth attorney, district attorney elsewhere, Steve Descano in Fairfax County, saying, you should turn over your case file to me because of one Richard Kenneth Cox. Ironic name, huh? COC, not COCK, but COX, excuse me. Um, because this guy had exposed himself and did a number of things which certainly he shouldn't have done. But there's some evidence that maybe he's not, maybe he got some mental issues. Um, and in any event, the Attorney General demands that it be turned over to him so that he can prosecute these cases. I'm not so sure that it should be done at the state level. It's been at the federal, I mean, at the local level for a very long time. Maybe that's where it needs to stay. Um, Senate Bill 844 is still in the House, still alive, but its companion in the Senate is dead. And um, the House bill that's in the Senate and the Senate bill that's in the House, well, it's dead in one place. And what this would do is say that everybody has to register for annually, tier one and tier two, which we already knew. But there's some sort of language that was left out of the original legislation, but we're still doing it anyway. So I don't know where the issue is necessarily. But if you have been convicted of lying or you haven't filled out your forms or something correctly, any little thing, they can make you do it every 6 months if you're on a tier one or tier two status. This is another sneaky little quiet way that they can expand the registry little by little and hammer you. And if you're saying out there it seems perfectly reasonable, it does, except in practice. What happens in practice is any little thing they will go after you. For example, we have a case out of Richmond where a young man was approached by his compliance officer. He contacted the compliance officer, got the compliance officer to come by, said, I'll get your paperwork because you've changed jobs. And then she was fired for incompetence. And he forgot about it. He had no idea she didn't file the paperwork. A year later, they come by to arrest him. Why? Because he changed jobs. He didn't notify anybody. He said, but I did. He showed the text message. Didn't matter. Didn't matter. Okay. Had to go to court, great cost, great expense. And there was several others who had the exact same issue. They went to jail. He was able, because he knew more of his rights, because we've helped him understand those, he did not go to jail, but he has another hearing coming up. So what do you think might happen? This is a sort of little thing that can happen that can harm people along the way. SB 1108, which says that a so-called sex offender cannot be within 100 feet of children at a state park. And as the patron said, well, this just conforms with the bill we passed a couple of years ago, which says that people can't be within 100 feet of somebody who is at a city park. And these people in question are people who have been convicted of a sex offense in which a real uh, child was the victim. Remember, there's a lot of tiers, a lot of levels of sex offenses that are in the code. Okay, so And of course, the average and ordinary troll makes no distinction whatsoever. They don't have any idea what they're talking about. But what this would do is go after you at a state park. It said you could be there with your own children, but you can't be within 100 feet of other children. Well, can't you just see the problems here? Your children might want to play with other children, but you wouldn't be able to be there. And if you had reason to believe, or did not have reason to believe that there's a playground on the other side of the hill, and that was within 100 feet, and somebody knew who you were, and your average and ordinary troll called the state patrol, you could be arrested on that. So it just again opens up the whole body of problems because they're trying to legislate behavior. They're trying to punish people who have little evidence that they continue to commit sex offenses. You know, this business of this man, Mr. Cox, COX, is not the rule. It is the exception to the rule. Recidivism is down to right around 4%, depending on how they calculate it. When you hear high recidivism rates, listen to my videos on that. It is depends on how they calculate it. One of the ways that they calculate it is if you're arrested for something else, then let's say you stole a car or something. Well, they will say a sex offender was arrested. They won't tell you that it was for some other crime. Now, you may say, well, I don't really care. Well, you know, which is worse? Somebody who didn't create a sex offense against a child, but who exposed themselves in the forest and somebody caught them because they were peeing, or and then subsequently later stole groceries, or somebody who has committed assault and battery 15 times. Which is more important? Well, the one that you hear about more is the one that has the dirty word sex involved with it. Okay? So don't believe everything you hear. Look into it more. The police are very, very deceptive with their language. So finally, we have HB 1991, which is one of my pet peeves. This is the domestic violence and sexual violence in a relationship database, which is the most appalling of all. Because what this would do, as I've said in one of my videos, is it would place you on this database after the first time. So you get one free rape and beating somebody up in a relationship, one freebie, and then on the second and third time, possibly two freebies if it's a third time, right? Then you'd be placed on this database and you could appeal to the circuit court to get off the database after 7 years of good behavior versus somebody who's on a tier one here in Virginia, which means that you have 15 years on there. And tier one is computer solicitation of a minor. As in my case, they arrested me because they thought perhaps possibly I might be going after children, even though I had never had any predilection to doing that in my 30 plus years in education. No predilection, no criticism for it, no discipline for it, nothing, nothing, nothing. Highly rated as a teacher, nothing. Okay, but of course that didn't matter, right? Because it had the word sex associated with it. When you have sex, internet, and children together, people think all manner of things that aren't true. Okay, and again, I'm happy to be the poster child for this out there if I have to be. But investigate it. You'll find there are many, many people in that particular position. So again, if you beat up a real woman or real man and rape them and do this repeatedly in a domestic violence situation, well, as long as you're a good boy for 7 years or a good girl for 7 years, you can get off of that. But if you didn't attack anybody, didn't solicit anybody, there's no evidence you solicited a fake child, somebody who doesn't really exist, why, you get 15 years to life on that one. Great, great program. Anyway, so this is what's going on in the General Assembly. Uh, please like and subscribe. It pushes it out to other people out there. And again, if you want to engage me, trolls, I'm happy to engage you. But please, again, no name calling. Ask me some questions. You know, um, try to get educated on some things, and then we're happy to discuss it on a mature level. Thank you very much. This is ICAC Unpacked. I'm Norman Michael Ation for the 12th day of February 2025. Take care.